Some friends of mine in the Anti-Xeno initiative have challenged me to take on a Thargoid Medusa using a Krait Mk2 with no engineering. I've taken up on their challenge, and then some. I said, well, if we're going to use a Krait Mk2, let's see if we can do it using only basic ammo. And while we're at it, since Krait can be made to look very much like a triangle, why don't we actually use triangular flak with a triple-flakked configuration and consequently only 2 medium Gauss cannons. That's not a lot of firepower for Medusa, but it's pretty doable. And then let's take the ship and make it look like a TriForce. A golden triangle, which is famous for the Zelda series of games. And with that meme build, we set off and challenge the Thargoid Medusa. Let's see how it goes. All of these funny adventures always start out with some kind of build configuration. This particular Krait, as I mentioned, has no engineering. It does rely quite a bit on Guardian modules, even though, candidly, they are not necessary to do what you're doing here. You can replace the power distributor, that's the Guardian version in this build, with the A version standard off the shelf, and it will work just fine. You can replace the hull and module reinforcement packages, which in this build are the Guardian version, with the regular human counterparts, and they will also work just fine. So this is an extremely low investment build that you can buy from Shinrarta Destra if you have access to it, or you can cobble it together across the galaxy, and requires no engineering whatsoever to work. The magic in this build rests in the size of a Krait's power distributor. Its class 7 power distributor allows you to fire 2 medium Gauss cannons while using only 2.5 pips in your weapon capacitor, freeing up 3.5 pips to put in your engine. That in turn will make the ship incredibly agile and allow it to perma boost, which is a pretty effective way to orbit Thargoids, even though it's not necessarily beginner friendly. The biggest downside of this build, and of most unengineered builds in general, is that it is very slow. It boosts only to 383 meters per second, which is a lot slower than a Medusa's top speed of 450. As a consequence, you have no ability to dictate range in this fight. The Medusa will constantly be catching up on you, and as a result, you'll find yourself having to rely on silent running and heat sinks to avoid cannon fire when in range, and to use well-timed boosts to try and create separation when you have the ability to do so. Since update 15, you also have to pay attention to not create too much separation, as when you pass around 10 kilometers in range, Thargoids suddenly lose interest and just warp out mid-fight, which is something actually happened to me in my first attempt to do this right before I actually shot this video. Still on the plus side, you do have 3 flak cannons, and that entails that swarms won't last very long. In fact, you can take down a Medusa swarm just with 2 well-placed shots, so long as the swarm is not in a ring formation. Back to the build configuration, you may have heard me say time and time again, in fact, you are probably tired by now of hearing me say how important speed is in anti-Xeno combat. This essential need for speed dictates that as much as possible you want a ship that is light. But there's a limit to how light it makes sense the ship to be. The minimum thruster mass is what dictates how light the ship can be, after which there's no benefits in going even lighter. For the Krait, that mass is 720 tons. Consequently, I've designed this build so that it had the most hull possible while staying under 720 tons and mounting as many limpets as possible. As it turns out, I can fit 44 limpets in my cargo hold, and that will take me precisely at 720 tons with the ship that you see here, which constantly will operate at its fastest speed possible. I could downsize my frameshift drive and make my fuel tank even smaller. However, that would only give me more limpets, and honestly, if I can't do this fight with 44 limpets, something else has gone fundamentally wrong. I'm not going to need those many limpets in the first place. And with that out of the way, let's see how the ship does in combat against the Thargoid Medusa. I hope you enjoyed these little shenanigans, Commanders, as a sort of a break from the main Thargoid war effort. As I've shown, the Krait is an incredibly capable ship, even in a completely unengineered configuration. However, do keep in mind that it's not easy to make a ship fly this way. It does take a lot of practice to get a hang of it. Did you enjoy this fight? What's your experience with unengineered ships? Let us know in the comments below. Glory to mankind, and fly safe, Commanders.